Hello friends, welcome back to the show. Today my guest is John Jacobs. John is a queen breeder from Rogue River, Oregon, USA. He has a business called Old Sol Apiaries, and starting in 1997 with a degree in biology, John's goal has been to produce productive, hardy, pest and disease tolerant bees that are also a pleasure to work with. Hope you enjoy this episode. John Jacobs, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, before I started recording, John, we were talking about how you think Australia should handle its Varroa incursion. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, just based on history, what we experience here in the United States and pretty much every continent that the mite has been introduced to. At the end of the day, I think you just have to plan on it being there. And learn how to manage them. It's not all bad. I mean, I think in this country, if you ask every old timer I've ever asked about, is it easier to make a living now with bees, with the mites, or before? And they all say it's easier to make a living now. I mean, it's harder to keep bees, but there is value in scarcity. So everybody will have to up their game as far as how they manage their bees and breed their bees.
Yeah, I have heard that before. Some people have said that, about half the people leave the industry once it takes hold, and then for the people who remain, they can do a little bit better. It's an interesting perspective on it. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you came to that conclusion?
Well, just watching what's happened since I started pollinating almonds. We were getting around $50 or $60 US in 2000, and it's climbed up to $200 a hive now. Just because, some of it's because of overplanting. They planted too many acres, but also just beekeeping's way more challenging, and a lot of people can't stomach the risk and find easier things to do.
Right. So what would be your advice in Australia at the moment? We think we've got it contained, but we're not sure. What would be your advice moving forward if it's rediscovered?
Have miticides on hand.
Right. Yep.
Before you have a problem. And, the best way to manage them is constant monitoring. I mean, you don't have to monitor every hive, obviously, but, a statistically significant sample, the alcohol, learn how to do the alcohol wash. You guys probably already know that, but, the best way to cope with mites is to never let them get bad. Because if they get real bad, you can clean the mites up to where they're hardly detectable, but they leave viruses behind. The viruses are as challenging as the mites, but if you can prevent, big flare-ups and just manage the mite population at like a 3% or lower throughout the season, they are manageable.
Yeah, right. Now, you've had an interesting history with the Varroa mite. In 1999, you were one of the first breeders to get the USDA Russian mite resistant stock. How did those bees compare to what the VSH lines are today?
That was so early in my career, but I found them at that time to be a bit swarmier and not too friendly, to put it nicely. They were pestier than what we were used to. The VSH lines seem they were bred from bees in the U.S. and they're a little more adapted. I think the Russian bees have gotten better from what I hear, but does that answer your question?
Yeah. So in terms of did those first Russian stock, were they able to suppress the mites as much as the current VSH lines, or have things improved a lot since then?
It seems, I would say that's actually a tough question. Without data to really support it. I mean, I could give you anecdotally, I would say the VSH lines are probably better than the first Russians, but I haven't got or ran any Russian colonies lately. We do run a lot of Caucasians, which have some similarities.
Right. So can you tell us what it's like to be part of the Bee Informed partnership?
Oh, it's great. I mean, we can do ourselves a lot of what they do for us, but we really like having a third party come in and help us vet our breeders. That's the main thing we do with them, and it's nice to have the way they tabulate all the data for you. It's highly searchable and really useful data we get.
Yeah. For people who are not aware of the Bee Informed partnership, can you tell us a little bit about what they do?
They do mite and disease monitoring, and their services can range, but they have all sorts of interesting programs. They have sentinel hives throughout the U.S., and they tabulate their observations by region, all over the country. So when you go to their website, you can really get a good feel for what's happening in the bee industry.
Yeah, very interesting program. Now, you've been working for 25 years on a line that you call Survivor Stock. Can you tell us a little bit about that line and why you call it your Survivor Stock?
Well, jokingly, they survived my early years as a beekeeper.
Right.
And when I did not know how to manage mites at all. I mean, we did go through some years where we applied extremely heavy selection pressure on the bees, like where you might lose 80% to mites and then spread back from those survivors. Since the early days, I've learned to manage the mites much better. But when we do select our breeders, we pre-mite treatment, we'll go out and survey top performers, and then we'll pull out the ones that have the lowest mite counts for our breeders.
Yeah, and so in that time, have you been introducing new VSH stock, or is that simply you're just breeding from the ones that are surviving and not bringing in extra stock?
Every 4 or 5 years, I usually bring in some genetics. We haven't done that in a while, except for the Caucasians. We fell absolutely in love with those bees. They're great bees to work with. So, and I kind of have an ongoing program with Washington State University. They're the ones who imported the genetics from the Republic of Georgia, and so I help them maintain those lines.
Right. And how long ago was that?
We got our first Caucasians, I want to say 6 years ago, somewhere in there.
Yep. And when did they import them?
They imported them to the bee lab at Washington State University in northeastern Washington, but they came, the semen was frozen and brought in from the Republic of Georgia.
And how long ago was that, John?
That was probably 2 years prior to me getting them, because they had to go through a huge quarantine process, and I found it interesting, all the hoops they had to jump through to bring those genetics in, compared to there was that brief period where Australian package bees were coming this way, and it was so much easier to bring those in than it was just to bring drone semen in, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, that is interesting. And so what are the characteristics of this particular line of Caucasian, and why are they favorable?
Um, their temperament is amazing. They're really good honey makers. And there's a fair demand for them, but not a lot of breeders focusing on them. We like bees that gather a fair amount of propolis. That was one of the other reasons why I got into them. As an industry, most breeders have selected away from bees that gather a lot of propolis, and I think that was quite possibly a mistake, over the last 150 years.
Why do you say that?
Well, propolis has a lot of great properties. It can be antiviral, antibacterial. It really helps the bees seal up the hive. In areas where there's small hive beetle, it makes it easier for them to imprison the beetles. It's a trait that evolved in nature because it increased the fitness of the hive. That's its ability to survive in the environment. A less managed situation. So my theory is that it's actually good for the bees, and we love that trait.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've introduced the Caucasians into your breeder lines, and during that 25 years, is the main thing that you're selecting for Varroa resistance, or are there other things that you're really interested in as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would definitely not recommend, too narrow of a selection scheme. We need bees that put beans on the table, so to speak. They have to make good honey. They have to be vigorous enough that you can make splits for selling. We sell a lot of bees, and they have to be nice to work with so that people let us bring our bees to their properties and what have you.
Yeah, right. And so with the survivor line, is it still necessary to treat that line?
Yes, it is.
And so what treatments are you using for your bees?
I think that's one thing I would definitely tell Australian beekeepers is when it does come to managing mites, have a variety of things available. We like oxalic acid, formic acid. We use some thymol products. Those are our main ones.
Okay, yeah. And so oxalic acid is a really interesting one. I think a lot of beekeepers in Australia are looking to get into that one. And we're not sure if it's going to be passed and become legal here in Australia at the moment, but it looks like it's going to be the best treatment when it does come.
Well, it's interesting. Before it was a certified use here, a lot of beekeepers were buying what's known as wood bleach, which is oxalic acid, and they just made sure their top bars were very well bleached.
All right. That's interesting. So let's talk a little bit about mating nucs. Can you tell us, you use a very big mating nuc, you use a 4-frame mating nuc. Can you tell us why you're not a fan of small mating nucs, why you use those big, strong mating nucs instead?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, actually. Even a marginal queen can totally lay out those tiny frames. It just makes it really hard to assess the brood pattern. But for us, we also like how they fold back into the operation real easily. It can be pretty much one box size, one frame for everything. A lot of our hives we run in 3 mediums with the 6 and 5/8 inches frame, smaller frames. And 3 of those put together is about equivalent to a double deep volumetrically, but we get 33% more pieces of brood to make nucs with.
Okay, right. So it's a lot more uniform than using, say, a mini mating nuc. Do you think that it's more successful in mating queens than the smaller mating nucs?
Hard to say. We basically plan on, a 75% take rate on cells that we put out. sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. Like you'll get a couple 90, 95s and start to feel a little comfortable, and then Mother Nature will come along and humble you with a 50% take. And if you average it over the year, it's probably about a 75% take rate. And I think it's pretty similar for the mini nukes too.
Okay, that's interesting. So you also talk about when you're selling a queen, you wait until she develops a strong pheromone signature and something that's been laying for at least 21 days. Can you tell us why you find this so important?
Your customers will love you when they have a high acceptance rate on your queens. Plus, it's more time to like vet them. Any marginal queens start to show by the time they're capping over their first round of brood. And then by 21 days, it's real obvious what's a good queen and what's not.
Right. And so when you see, let's just say, the queens that come back mated, how many of those do you think, as a percentage, do you think you'd accept after 21 days and sort of just and say, no, we don't need that one? What would be your acceptance rate personally? Not what comes back mated, but what would be your personal acceptance rate?
Usually, I would say 90%, but not always. Sometimes we've had like poor weather and the queens had spotty pattern, and like we'd cull half, but that's become less and less common.
Oh, okay. Now, you offer a consulting service on queen breeding. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Well, I actually have not been doing much of that lately. Most of my consulting work has been around pollinator habitat for utility scale solar companies. That's kind of taken up almost all my consulting work lately.
Yeah,
it's really fun projects because these are like 30-year projects, and if you can get them to plant forage for the bees around the solar arrays, they're like 80, 100-acre installs, sometimes more, sometimes less, but that it'll be in that land use for 30 years. So you kind of create these little pollinator oasis type situations.
That's very interesting. So you've been working with power companies to plan out these areas.
Yeah, and where we've gotten it done, and we put the bees out there, and they do amazing. I mean, it's noticeably different than our other locations. So it seems for some reason we've got our sweet spot with the solar industry on these projects.
That's really interesting. Great. So is there anything else that you're currently working on, John, that you'd like to talk to us about?
Oh, we've been making a lot of mead lately. I've been doing some recipe development for the last 3 or 4 years, and we're starting to win a few awards here and there, and we're thinking about maybe adding that as a component to our business here over the next year or two.
That's really interesting. So if people visit you now, can they get it?
Well, I can't legally sell it, but we can sure sample some.
That's really interesting. So how did that all start? Where'd you get the idea to do that?
It's a multifaceted motivation. I mean, when I was in college, I worked at a brewery, so I've always kind of loved the brewing process. I was a bartender, not a brewer, but I helped in the brewery occasionally. But we, in the valley where most of our bees are, they used to grow a lot of pears, and the industry's been almost all the trees are gone now. There's only like 10% of the pear trees there was when I started beekeeping, and I kind of wanted to come up with a value-added product for the last of the pear growers that we pollinate, and my idea was to incorporate local fruit into our meads. That kind of helps support the rest of that industry, and plus honey prices have gotten a little better, but it would be rough just to make a living from having to sell honey. So, a value-added product made from honey is also very, very appealing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've read that mead might be the oldest alcoholic beverage. Not sure about
It is.
that.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's mankind's oldest recipe. It predates agriculture. The first mead was probably an accident, and a pot of honey got rained on or something, or they harvested some raw honey and it fermented. But it's man's oldest recipe. The history behind mead it is very fascinating. It's rose in many different cultures too. There's some Asian cultures that had some ancient mead recipes, and all over the world there's various forms of what we would recognize as mead. It's kind of interesting.
That's very interesting. Well, hopefully people will be able to come and visit you soon and try some of your mead. Can you tell us where we can find you online, and also whereabouts we can find you if people want to come and try some mead?
We are oldsolbees.com online, and we have an Instagram also that has a lot of pictures about what that kind of highlight what we do. And we're in the Rogue Valley, Southern Oregon is where our farm base is, but we run bees all over the state.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, John, for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, and good luck with the mites. It's not all bad if they do establish, and I would definitely count on them establishing. I don't think anyone's ever defeated them once they've come ashore, so to say.
That is true. I've read that no one has managed to eradicate the mite once it's taken hold in established colonies. So yeah, it's not looking good, but we'll see how we go. Thanks, John. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that episode, having a chat with John. Very nice guy, and how good is that he's making some mead and he's going to be using the pear trees from one of his original apiary sites. If you want to follow that journey, you can at oldsolbees.com. That's the website, which is Old Sol Apiaries. He's also on Facebook at Old Sol Apiaries. And I thought it was really interesting how he uses these large mating nucs with 4 frames to produce bees that are very well vetted, as he says. Well, thanks so much for tuning in today. If you want to get in touch with me, you can at nixonbees.com.au. Have a great day.